Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing, one of the fastest growing real estate investing podcasts in the world. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors? Find out what got them to where they are now. Get insight into their daily habits and take these insights to inspire your own growth. Each episode, Jonathan Greene shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor and the founder of Streamline, a data-driven, investor-friendly, independent real estate brokerage located in Madison, New Jersey. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, this is the free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
Thanks for showing up for another episode of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. My guest today is Ari Rastegar. Can't wait for you to hear from him shortly. We're going to talk a lot about capital preservation and resilient returns through real estate, and that's what Ari has figured out how to do at his company, Rastegar Capital. Let's get to it right now. This is episode 294 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Ari Rastegar. Ari is the CEO of Rastegar Capital. And what do? They revolutionize real estate investments for institutional investors and high net worth individuals. Ari is also the best-selling author of The Gift of Failure, a father, founder, and CEO. Ari, welcome to the show.
How are you, buddy? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I like reading your background, and I'm like, oh, I see a lot of mindful parts of this, especially with the gift of failure. I wanted to start there because I know it plays a role in your real estate trajectory. Why do you think it's so important for, let's say, real estate investors to have that taste of failure?
Well, when things are all candy canes and lollipops and the markets are going up and, you buy a bunch of stuff or you sell things, you look like a hero. And, we've been there. I started this business 10 years ago with a $3,500 loan. So if you look at the years that we were operating, a few at the beginning looked pretty incredible with low interest rates, and then COVID and, rates flying up and all those things that happened, which I think is once in really like a 30-year cycle, quite frankly, with that many, black swan event like a pandemic could be once in 100-year cycle. So you come to learn very quickly, the mechanics of what it takes to be a real estate investor, because you deal with so many different things, whether, bill pay, property management, liabilities on property, loan covenants, investors, roofing, insurance claims. There's so many things, from a liability standpoint that real estate broaches on. And you don't really get to learn the nuances of liability. I'm a recovering attorney.
Me too.
So it's in our DNA to assess downside. But really looking at downside too much doesn't make you a very good entrepreneur, because looking at that much risk and that much uncertainty makes it hard to go out there and try to create something meaningful, which is at the core of everything that we do. So when the markets are in a winter season, for lack of a better, I'm reading this incredible book right now that I recommend to everybody. It's called The Fourth Turning.
Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah, I haven't read it, but I've heard of it. I heard it was great.
Spectacular. I actually heard about it watching Tony Robbins, the world famous Tony Robbins, talking about when he was coaching Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, and he saw that they both were reading at the same time when they were arch enemies. And I think it's truer today about understanding the seasons or the turnings, as Mr. Strauss and Mr. Howe kind of lay out. And I think when you're in that winter season where things appear to be failing or appearing to be breaking or are breaking in some regards, you start to learn the mechanics of what it really takes to build a long-term multi-billion-dollar real estate investment platform, because you deal with every department. You're looking at sales and marketing, you're working with investor relations. When everybody's happy and everybody's printing money, it's very easy to get on the phone and tell everything's great. Getting a bank to extend a loan when rates have gone up, and which is all part of what it takes to do this at a massive scale. I mean, if you look at our land reserves now, just the land reserves we have allocated for multifamily development allows us to build quite literally thousands of new apartments, not counting the single family homes or skyscrapers and all the stuff we've completed. And so you learn a lot how to create discipline, to create order, to create process, which as a founder at the beginning kind of sounds boring and, sounds like maybe something you'll deal with in 50 years when you join the S&P 500. But that foundational element you get by either inspiration or desperation, you get really good at in down markets. And then when the market inevitably does start to flow in the direction that makes us all happy, you're equipped with those tools that you learned or had to deal with at the quote failing part of the cycle. And that goes for personal development and that goes for business development. I think that they're very much one and the same. When you bought an apartment complex, it didn't go as well as planned. That was your first attempt. Hopefully by the 10th one you bought, you figured out some other potential risk controls, how to negotiate an extra 50 basis points, off the debt, and put those safeguards in place so you can grow disciplined and continue to scale at a very high level. Because when you're scaling at the level we have been, things are breaking, and when they're breaking, you're fixing them on the fly. You're realizing that this particular tool you've outgrown. You need a new tool. And all of that happens through the winter season, through the failing season. And that all builds into the next, hopefully those that work through it through the accumulation phase. And that's what it starts to get really fun.
Yeah. I mean, don't you think that, especially you're obviously a big reader as am I, when we're talking about the gift of failure and going to business, I think that the people who get the most successful across the board appreciate the failure and get motivated by it instead of what maybe a newer crop, because the internet has taken over. It's a little different than when I was younger, where it's like, the failures just aren't so big because there's just like these little micro failures that they're trying to get away from. Nobody has like a paper route anymore or is trying to sell door-to-door vacuums where you just get no 100 times. They're just using like call machines to get no's. So they're kind of like disassociated from no. What do you think that has to do with it? And then the makeup of the person, accepting a failure and getting motivated by it.
I think it's a great thing to think about, because I think failure or failure tolerance, and there's a lot of science about this now, through neuroplasticity, through just how we're trained to either tolerate risk, tolerate problems, how we look at problems, what that actually means. And I think so much of that is forged in the process. Like that, the person that got, 1,000 no's and digested that emotionally was able to take that resonance to their nervous system and digest the feelings of lack of worthiness or shame or whatever emotions start to come out of. And we all have our own stuff that comes up when we're confronted with what we call failure, or something that we're not good enough or we didn't do good enough. Maybe you think of your parents, or you think about your significant other, whatever comes up, something comes up. And the more that you confront that, I believe, and I think there's a lot of science that goes to show that, you gain, neural memory. We've called it muscle memory for many years, but I think it's really neurological memory. Like you take the myelin sheath that covers the nerves, the myelin begins to grow. So it's really more myelin memory than it is muscle memory. That you start to see, okay, this is what that threat was. What is assess what that threat is? How is it fatal? Is it not? Is it a flesh wound? Is it a silver bullet? And as you start to build that discernment, you also build the muscle memory and the faculties and the tools to deal with these threats as they begin to come, because that's really what happens going into this world of investing. It's going out to the jungle. There are all sorts of different types of animals that are friendlies. There are some that are predators. I, at this point in my life, have tried to become smart prey, where get feed off the Tyrannosaurus Rexes and figure out at the same time to harmonize with the other, plants and animals that are in the ecosystem and start to build out what our, kind of little plot of jungle is.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's go all the way back. Why real estate? When was the first time you remember real estate starting to play a role in your life? And did you think, hey, this is going to be the thing I'm going to do forever? Uh-huh.
I didn't. It started with a loan and my scholarship money when I was in law school. And I bought a little single family lot for $3,500 in 2007, which should tell you the rest of how the world turned out.
Yeah, going into some good times.
Yeah, and we worked with a local developer who's still a good friend to this day, and got a $80,000 interim construction loan, which felt like 800 million to
Yeah, yeah.
the poor kid delivering pizzas at Double Dave's and working at Johnny Rockets. And we built it and sold it, and it made money. And we did a second one, and I worked in the mornings at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning on the build site, drove 25 or 30 miles to law school, to the oldest Catholic school, Catholic University in Texas in the Southwest, actually, St. Mary's, and did law school kind of by day and did real estate development in the mornings and nights. And then the market took a full shift. I also graduated from law school and was lucky enough to pass the bar the first time, but the market went to zero overnight. So getting another loan or doing another house. So I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought, we could do no wrong. If that makes sense. And my journey took me through a couple other soul crushing failures in the entertainment business, some stuff that we did as a corporate litigator, and then made my way back into private equity, working for some big names in New York City and down here in Austin. And over the last 10 years, we built a business that once fully developed on the land that we own, that we've entitled, that we've permitted. We have billions and billions of dollars of assets, but there's a long journey, and there's a jungle and a Nile River that needs to be crossed in the interim, and we're working through with our little canoes.
Yeah, it's really interesting, though, because most of the time, I mean, again, this is episode 294. The first thing that people do doesn't turn out to be the thing, but it's really interesting that your first thing wasn't just, buying a house, doing a lipstick flip, or doing a house hack or living. You were immediately going into development. Why did you think, hey, I can develop something? Because the price for land is attractive, but not everyone thinks, hey, I'm going to build something. And most of us would tell someone, don't do that because you're going to get, run on that one, but you didn't.
Well, I was a wrestler growing up. Okay. And I wrestled on an unbelievable team in Texas. Probably one of the best high school wrestling teams maybe ever assembled. And I don't say that lightly. I was a mediocre wrestler at best. So the people that were in my weight class were state and national champions, just, kick the shit out of me every day. So the only thing I can tell you is I've been very comfortable being on my back, most of my life. And ignorance has also been a very big blessing in hindsight, because at the time I didn't appreciate the risks that went into building a house. I just saw houses being built to build, sold, build, sold, build, sold. Now, what I know going back at the great financial crisis, that wasn't normal. That me driving back and forth, from Spring Branch, Texas to San Antonio, Texas, seeing a house just started in framing, immediately say sold underneath it, which was the impetus for me to do this.
Yeah, right.
Little did I know all the mechanics that went into what was going to create the mortgage meltdown and what it took without me. I just thought that's what you do. You buy a lot and you save up a little bit of money and it's built, and then you get rich. And
that's what I think is so cool. You're actually still doing that. You're just doing it on a gigantic scale, but like really the basics of what you're doing for large scale development is finding the land first. Obviously there's long entitlement if you're doing what you're doing, but it's really the same process, bigger scale. And that's what I see as interesting, because so many people start flipping and then eventually they get into multifamily and then they do syndications. But you're really like, your core principle of that $3,500 purpose is still at play. I think it's pretty cool.
Well, I really I appreciate that. And I think it's yes and no. I think the underlying premise of desperately wanting to build something, is absolutely in my DNA. And we definitely are entrepreneurs through and through. But the big difference that is worth mentioning is, yes, like I'm still me in that regard, that kid, that optimistic kid that believes the country, the world will be better tomorrow than it was yesterday, which is a fundamental driver of what I actually believe. And I think that if you study the statistics, and you really see what it was like to be alive 25 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, the amount of crime, the amount of war, the amount of dysentery, the amount from water, there's nobody on earth statistically that wouldn't pick to be born right now.
Right. Yeah.
Period. And so when you really factor that in and look at all these changes, the advent of AI, the fourth industrial revolution, I think the glaring difference for me personally as a firm, certainly, absolutely, and me as a human being, as a father, is understanding the downside more than ever. And does that temper my enthusiasm? Not necessarily, but it does cause me to act more with intelligence in the sense of there are real threats when it comes to interest rate risk. There was never a time ever, and thank God for this in a way, I say this, somehow, that rates where they were at zero, what we know now is that's not sustainable. I truly didn't know that at that time. And so you put variable risk, you take recourse, you do all these things. You do all these things for you don't know any better in one way, or it's the best information you have at that moment. Thank God. We've done more good than we have bad. We've made more money for our firefighter clients, for our physicians, for other huge institutions, individuals, and we continue to do that. But we've learned it on the fly with this much more of a focus. And when you use the word hedge fund, being from Texas, I didn't know Wall Street was even a street. I thought Wall Street was just rich people until I lived close. I was like, oh shit, it's a street.
Right, it's there.
Is this concept of hedging. And it never crossed my mind. I thought hedge fund again was just what rich people do and watch Bobby Axelrod on Billions and you just make money, which I love that show too. But
such a good show.
but figuring out you could win, but at what cost? And what cost to you personally? Like, what do you got to pay the piper in terms of missed weekends with the kids or extra hours in the thing? At what cost of capital to go procure this investment, and looking at the time value of money and what those investments really mean? What's net returns or what are absolute returns? Can you eat IRR? I don't think so. And so those refinements, I think, have been the forging of steel for me personally. And again, not tempering, just I am more optimistic than ever about the future. I am more optimistic than ever about what we can build, how we can build it, the technologies to enable them, to geofence properties for better data, better service to customers. But now and I don't want to say I'm more realistic because I hate that. I think that we are now more intelligent with assessing the risks and the threats that are in front of us and deal with them with appropriate measure versus in some instances before, certainly in law school, not thinking that there was risk. And that by itself was the riskiest thing of all.
Yeah, and also there's a big difference because then you had no duty to anyone besides yourself, and now you have a fiduciary duty to all the investors and your partners and everybody else. So there's kind of that collaboration that happens where it was like, if you lost the 3,500, defaulted on the 80,000 construction loan, you and maybe someone who helped you was in trouble, but not 150 investors and developers and partners and all that.
You weigh all these things, right? You're constantly weighing what those things are, what is suitable investing, what is not. And again, all based upon the data and the concepts, that you have in front of you. I would definitely recommend anybody that is doing any type of syndication or raising third-party capital to use a third-party fund administrator. Early in my career, we learned that lesson very early. We work with a great group out of Miami that, handles all the back. Does that guarantee you make a bunch of money? Absolutely not. But it does, guarantee to some degree that, there's risk controls in place, that the flow of capital is appropriate. Tax returns are being done. K1s are being done. What your numbers are with a disinterested set of eyes, and has been, great for us and made a lot of our institutional investors very comfortable early on with not necessarily what the returns would be, but that our assessment was sound. And we had a third-party sounding board to run those off of and move forward. So I would definitely, anybody that is attempting to be in this business to know that there are huge risks involved, entrepreneurial risks at a company level, at the asset level, and not as a place of dissuading people, because I think we're going to go into I'm have a high degree of certainty we're going to go into one of the largest real estate booms that's inconceivable to mankind over the next 10 to 15 years, whether through data center development, whether, having 7 million houses short just the United States alone,
Yeah.
all the downstream economics that are needed there from plumbing to electricity, horizontal development on site, vertical development. So there's going to be there's this pent up demand that is almost unfathomable when you say 7 million homes. New York City alone, some could argue that there are 1 million to 1.5 million homes or apartments short just within Manhattan Island. At one point, that pent up demand is going to swing the other way. So appreciating what those upside potentials are, having great subject matter expertise, local market expertise, I think is paramount. It's really how we built our business. Although we've invested in 38 cities, 13 states, et cetera, Texas has become a place that it's home. We understand the local players. We understand the players at the top. And just getting really smart about what business are you in, what business should you be in, and, laser focusing on those objectives.
Yeah, I mean, since I was young, I always knew real estate was local. Obviously, you've expanded that, but when you look for a new market and you say it's outside Texas, are you looking for markets that behave similar to the markets that you're comfortable with? Because then the transition is going to be at least a little bit similar. Of course, it's all new players, but I've seen a lot of people who say, okay, I like this city here. We're going one state over, but we know it behaves like the laws are very similar. It works the same way. It makes that transition easy. Obviously, at this stage, you can probably branch out to anywhere you want and figure it out. But how did it go in the start when the first time you're like, hey, let's go outside of Texas, or at least outside of an area that...
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's something we think about a lot. Early on, and I think this goes for other people listening that are wanting to invest, is we started out really as a fund to fund, effectively.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So we invested with operators all across the United States, and were able to cut accretive deals in LP positions, in some instances in co-GP positions and other, and work with localized experts that understand this niche of Class B, Class C apartments in this niche of Connecticut, that know the vendors, that know the players, that know the cost, they know it cold, and we enable them. And then the economics on a gross basis flow to us and then flow to our clients. And we did well doing there. I think the mentality is very similar where, this business, real estate, is about people. And I've said this many, many times, and it sounds very cliched, but, cliches are cliches for a reason. And the things that we like in this business, we like in any market. It could be here, it could be Singapore, which is, is there job growth? Is there positive net migration of people actually going there? And is there an element of fun? That sounds a little bit nuanced, but people like, and certainly as the boomers and the other generations start to age longer, where life expectancy, where we thought we'd collect the pension at 65, you'd be dead by 80, is becoming 95. I read this study in Japan that there is now 100,000 centurions in little Japan, 100,000 people over the age of 100, and they expect that number to increase by 10% every recorded year that they do it. So if somebody had a certain retirement amount expecting to croak at 80 or at 65, 20 more years of living either has to be 20 years of very strategic planning done 30 years in the past, increased time working. So that's going to create so many different needs. And there's a lot of things we focus on AI, eliminating jobs, and we read about this, and it is a concern. There's no question, especially the speed. But there was a time when 80% of Americans were farmers. And now 3% people are farming, and we have more productivity. And I think this is that time where we start to think of the demand is absolutely insatiable, certainly around necessity-based real estate. Multifamily at the top of that list, single-family home, essential housing, not just what we call affordable housing. So I think this is the time during this winter season, this down part of the cycle, which we believe, and a lot of greater real estate minds than us at Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, would tend to agree that we're at this part where, there hasn't been more new supply because construction has been effectively halted at a macro level. And when that swings back in, what's that going to look like? So we're asking ourselves, how do we need to be equipped? What kind of company do we need to be? What type of productivity do we need to be over the next 36 months? Because life, certainly real estate happens in decades. It doesn't happen in days. And I think it's very important that as we micro in on that chart, like the S&P that appears to be going like this or up and down or whatever, when you zoom out a little bit, you start to see this upward trajectory, you start to see more opportunity. You start to see that life doesn't happen linear. It happens through this ebb and flow, micro ebb and flow, or the micro failures that you spoke to.
Yeah.
And deal with them appropriately, because the value's there. I mean, there is a time, if you know what you're doing right now, you have the capital, you have the land reserves, and you have some risk tolerance and you have some thick skin, there is unfathomable amount of money to be made. But this generation, the generations beneath me, and some I think are battle wounded, I think are, been rightfully torn apart by certain cultural issues, certain economic issues, timing over the last however many years. But if you can buckle in and stay focused and access this wealth of information through YouTube, coursework, it astonishes me how much free information. I bought this book on Amazon for $4.
Yeah, right.
And this book has a lifetime of a wealth of knowledge for me as a person, for investment cycles, for cultural, national cycles. And it just astonishes me sometimes how little people are willing to work on these things, and how little they're willing to work to just get Amazon Prime, 15 minutes later. And I use it too. But this is the time to get very granular in your approach.
Hey, it's Jonathan. I hope you're enjoying this episode with Ari Rastegar. And if you have investment properties, one thing you may want to think about is cost segregation. My guy, Sean Graham at Maven Cost Segregation Tax Advisors has an option for you. He's actually working right now on a cost segregation for me for the last property that I bought. If you want to get some of that and you're interested in cost segregation for your investment properties so you can save on taxes and do it in the year that you want, go to mavencostseg.com/Greene. And Greene has an E at the end. That's my affiliate link. Let's get back to Ari. Yeah, and I think one trait I would add into that nice mix that you laid out there is patience, because that's what we keep talking about. It's like, you were talking about the trajectory, and I love that word because I always see it as the slope that goes up, but day to day, it doesn't look like much. But if, Jeff Olson's The Slight Edge, you're just doing it, compound interest, all of those books, compound effect. If you just do it, I mean, it's just like anything. I always use weightlifting as an example because it's so easy to someone. They go in one day, they can only do, 3 sets of something. So they're like, oh, I suck at this, I'm going to stop. But if you just did 3 sets and then 1 extra rep, if you did that every day for the year, you're going to be jacked at the end of the year. And I think you can apply that to business too. It's just like staying consistent. It's hard for people now.
Yeah, I think we all struggle with it, in our own ways. And the stories we tell ourselves, the beliefs, that we have that we don't even know that we have. But, I saw Bill Ackman talking the other day about a particular tough, time in his life. The fund was down 95%. He had a bunch of other stuff going on, personal stuff, family stuff. And he, very openly kind of explains it. And he explains this power of compounding on a personal level, which I'm a huge believer in. Anybody that knows me knows. Personal development, health and wellness is a big part of my life. And mostly because it's sometimes the only thing I think I can control, just so you know, to where if things are going bad or I feel a certain way, or I feel like I have some control over what I put in my mouth for food, what vitamins that I take, whether or not I move my body vigorously. And somehow for me, that's been a way to gain control over the uncontrollable when externalities happen. But the way Mr. Ackman explained it is that if you have personal development or personal growth of 0.1% per day, 0.1%. So if you think of that on a meal, if you're eating a big meal of, burgers and French fries, which I love as much as the next person, if you improve that meal by 0.1%, it's like a shred of one French fry of not eating. But if you did that consistently over 1 year, 1 year, 0.1% compounded on a daily basis is a ridiculous number, but not, to your point, in the first 3 weeks, not the first month,
Yeah.
even not the first 3 months, but it hits that J curve like everything else. And I think that relentlessly focusing on some type of growth and improvement in the business and the person, is that being the core demarcation of, the Japanese call it Kaizen, constant never ending improvement. I think the math is pretty clear that over time you will reap benefits and they will be outsized. But there is a certain amount of time, patience, whatever term you want to use, before those, you start to reap, that harvest of all the plants and seeds that you've sown.
Yeah, I think you have to kind of be able to sit in that mediocrity, even though maybe it's not mediocre. It's just you're just building a foundation. And I feel like too many people don't want to build the foundation. They just want to stand on top of a foundation and get to work. But that's the house of cards that falls down. They're like, I wonder how that happened. It's like, well, you didn't do anything to build it. You just got up there. I have kids who are both adults now, so they're in the younger generation, but looking at it and looking at what people say about investments and then what they put out on social media, it's not everybody, but I definitely see it's harder for people to do this long-term think. Well, can't someone just, can't AI build me the foundation? I stand on it and then I'm smart. It's like, but you didn't read the books. They would rather plug in, not everybody, but they would take that book that you've lifted up a couple times and just, get the Blinkist version. Then you miss all the good stuff. It's all part of what you're going to retain.
Well, it's also, I do believe, and again, I'm at that place where, as the oldest millennial, I'm the old guy, to all the young people, and I'm the young guy to the old people. And so I'm stuck in the middle of these two generations. And I can say, I was telling my father this the other day, that I know that I'm getting a little older, because now all of these books, I was an English literature major in undergrad, by the way. I don't know if you know that, but I've been reading books as a profession, certainly my entire adult life.
Yeah.
And also, maybe some in high school, not as much as I could have. But basically, there comes a point where you realize, reading all of these quotes from Warren Buffett, or certainly I have, where they start to become more real. I read this thing of, Warren Buffett talks about time, and he says, you can't make a baby in 1 month with 9 women. And so it's a very kitschy, smart thing. You kind of laugh at it. You're like, yeah, that makes sense. And then, as you sit with statements like that over the years, you start to see, wow, there's actually some wisdom behind those statements.
Oh, yeah.
You can't, watch pot never boils, and, whatever. We have cliche on cliche to explain these things. But one of them for me has been, the person that you become when you overcome these challenges, problems, thinking of them as problems, or thinking of them as, challenges in disguise, thinking of them as gifts that you can grow from. You can pick it to mean, whatever you want to. I've had it mean both many different times in my life, oftentimes, toggling back and forth between the two different meanings, but we can choose what things really mean. And I think that's very empowering, and we don't get to grow like that until we're tested, until we're tested in some way, whether it's the weightlifting analogy of the more weight you push, the more stress you can endure. It's like lottery winners, that 99% of them lose all the money because they don't have money tolerance. You gain money, but money is there's a certain amount of skill that goes into it. There's a certain amount of tolerance that must be forged and cultivated, where if you don't have the vessel or the thing to hold that amount of money and all the things that go along with it, the responsibilities, the liabilities, there's leaks and it just falls away. And I think that goes with, as people also, certainly as entrepreneurs, where, to some degree, our business is a reflection of who we are. And as the business evolves and other people come on board, it becomes becoming a collective vision, a collective mirror of all the people that involve. But, growing as a human being, I think, is the inextricable part of how businesses grow as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I talk about it all the time. And again, this is, I created this podcast as the mindful approach, a little bit different, but I've always told people, if you're not good, if you don't feel good about yourself, you're going to make terrible business decisions. you're going to ruin companies. You're not going to treat the employees right. So like things happen in all of our lives. There's death, there's divorces, there's accidents, things happen, but you have to like always be working on yourself. I can tell you're somebody who values that. I definitely am. But I look at anybody who's struggling personally, but they're still trying to do the business and they're wondering, I don't know why my business is failing. Have you found that as an important factor? Like always making sure like you're on solid ground. And if you're not, making sure that you have people with you who can handle those decisions, because you just can't trust yourself sometimes when life's a little haywire.
I definitely think there's something to that. The issue is when you're in a crisis. I think sometimes the biggest mistake is not recognizing that it is a crisis.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when you're in a position where you're really stressed out and all those things are happening, which any business owner in varying degrees, and comparing the degrees is cruelty, right? So whatever degree that you're at, your wit's end and you're pulling your hair out, and we all know that in different ways. I'm sure a problem that I have to Warren Buffett, he might not think is a big financial problem, but to me it is, and how you perceive it or whatever. I think that sounds great, and I think you're right in that regard. I just think that the emotional intelligence that most of us have built or acquired create blinders in stressful moments where we go into a fight or flight sensation. And unfortunately, the TikToks and the instant pushes and pings and dings that we're drawn with fights for our attention so much and is drawn in so many different ways where focus becomes diluted to where when something that you explain, when I'm not feeling well or I'm not on my P's and Q's, I should look at this and create a support system. I think that by the time those notions even come to a level of awareness for most entrepreneurs, it's already way too late to address maybe that. Not too late to solve it longer term, but in that particular moment, say, let me pull myself out of this, take the food out of my mouth. I should go to the gym 5 times, because we're not robots.
Yeah.
We function at a level of so much illogical behavior, so much emotional behavior that people say we're not emotional beings, just haven't picked up a psychology book in the past 50 years. Like, we're governed by emotions, not, and the thoughts that we have that are emotionalized, those are the ones that we go after, good or bad. So there's a marriage of the two. So I think that working on ourselves as much as we can within a framework of control, whether that's what we eat, how we move our bodies, what we read, what we choose to ingest, I think is more important than ever. But it's not about addition. It's about elimination. It's about eliminating things more than adding to them in an area that we're drowning in information and quite literally starving for wisdom. And I think wisdom is one of those things that has to be earned through experience. And you can ask for facts, you can ask for strategies, ask for plans to ChatGPT. And I talk to ChatGPT more than probably anybody in my life at this moment, like, and anybody else that isn't. They should find a way to converse with this brilliant assistant tool mechanism that keeps getting smarter every day. But there's certain parts where we understand intellectually in our lives, and there's certain parts where experience pulls that intellect or pulls that information and converts it to wisdom. And I think at this point in my life, that is under it takes some time and some patience, and, rushing it does nothing to cause more problems. I'm sure there's people much smarter than me that will be able to do it more efficiently and more tactically. Mine has definitely been a ups and down, topsy-turvy, looking like the stock market. Luckily, I think the growth trajectory has been more upward than downward. But there's a lot of trial and error in the process.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on something that I read on the front of your website that I really liked, because it was very aspirational, and I know it probably represents partially the mission of your company. It says commercial real estate investing for the story you're still writing. What story do you want to help everybody write? Because I know you're focused on a certain avatar and you want to help them get somewhere. So tell us about that, because I really liked it when I read it, and I feel like it just resonates with a lot of people, because it means, hey, you're not done no matter what age you're at. Like, let's get going again, which is similar to a lot of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate you pointing that out, because I think stories are how we understand history. It's how we understand ourselves. We come from the griot tradition of an oral culture that makes us understand the world by the stories we tell, whether they're dogmatic principles, whether they're historical principles. But stories are how we connect as people. And I think that when you're building something like we are, quite literally building houses, building homes, building apartments, cultivating land, all those things are about building for the future, quite literally. And so a lot of the folks that go to our website, as a general rule, are some of our more high net worth clients that are looking for us to fit in some asset allocation bubble for them for financial growth. And a lot of them, that I've become very close with over the years, they obviously want to grow their finances and want to make money and all those things. Absolutely. And there's a place for real estate, I think, um, in everybody's overall financial plan. I'm not a financial advisor. Understanding the nuances of all of them or giving financial advice is not what I do. But I've come to find that people take a lot of pride in the building of these stories, i.e. these buildings. So a lot of the investors are in at the time we buy the land, and they go through the entitlement process. They see the zoning, they see the architectural plans, they watch it come to life. They come to the groundbreaking ceremonies. They come back and bring their kids years later, and it was an elementary school standing on a piece of land that was once 11 acres before I donated it to the city of Kyle. Um, and you get to see how much pride people feel in being able to be a part of building something. Everybody wants to build something. That's what life is: building your family, building your business, building your bodybuilding. And I think that's something very powerful that unites all people, is when you have a story, a vision, for what something is, and a path to get there and forge to get it, and be able to reap benefits for the community, for the patrons, for the investors. You start to deal on that little magic that makes us people. And certainly that's the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, is being able to build something that lasts, that um, has a real value, has a value to the people that occupy it, the people that built it. Because at the end of the day, great businesses only become great businesses when everybody along the way is getting some sort of value, whether economic value, emotional value. But value must be created, and when value is created for all those that are involved and continue to create more value, continue to innovate, at the end of the day, that's what you call a great business.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think when you see that, you're really getting that win-win thing that a lot of us know, like, hey, this is the whole point. If everyone's happy, then we've done well. Doesn't mean every return is going to be the highest ever, but you could have a great product that you put out there. Is there like an asset class, or if it's multifamily, like a number or even a class of property that you really get the most pride out of doing?
I think housing in general is a big deal for us.
Especially now, yeah.
Especially now, and being able to really craft and design, large master plan communities, from understanding where the amenities will be, understanding how the commercial will work, where the houses will be, if there's a school there, if there's businesses, and looking at it from 30,000 feet and laying it out in the best interest of what that town is, the access points where people are going to live, where they're going to work, and really understanding those nuances and helping to design that infrastructure is very gratifying for me, because we get to look at it artistically. We get to look at color schematics. We have to assess water, population. We get to look at the whole picture and play a small part in how people will either purchase these houses from our builders, develop them from us, build their own retirements, raise their families, build their businesses. It's amazingly gratifying to be able to see the whole thing. And then that permeates into the logistics, the industrial facilities that we built, now the data centers that we're working on, the apartment complexes. But that part of the business is great for me, and anything involving zoning and entitlements, because really that's telling the market, or telling a locality, telling the principals in a locality where the puck is going.
Yeah.
And seeing like this vision of where the future is. So like, hey, you look at this now and you maybe see a 20-foot old nightclub, but because Goldman Sachs is building their new headquarters across the street, maybe we should build a 40-story tower that can house the folks that are coming there, because this law was based upon the needs of society at any given moment, and those needs are not there anymore. So how can we re-signify laws and change laws to better serve the society and the need and the populations? That part of it, to me, is definitely the most gratifying.
Yeah. I mean, so if we're so far behind, how do you think we got so far behind? I don't know if you read Abundance by Derek Klein and Ezra Thompson, but they had a long part about why they thought we got behind on building. It has a lot to do with a few things, but I wonder what you think. Like, is the entitlement process longer because of environmental concerns, NIMBYism, just general small town government politics? I know they all play a role, but what have you seen, and what do you think has created this vast differential between housing that we need and housing that's available?
Yeah, it's a big question, and I don't think it's a one-dimensional question. In fact, I think that there's a lot of innovation that's needed in from a policy making standpoint that would change the bureaucracy that goes into zoning, permitting, density.
Yep.
That needs to be, and again, the systems that were in place, in fairness, were systems in terms of the speed, the timelines, fit the pace and the need. I'd like to believe society at that time, but with the changes, these exponential changes in technology, or the rate at which we get information as consumers and react to them, has changed so exponentially that it has made the policies in a lot of instances impotent.
Yes.
And I don't think it's this one particular, this committee and blah, blah, blah. Sure, we can find fingers to point at one particular council person that's a pain in the butt, or, some person that didn't sign an affidavit of support. But there's a much bigger dialogue at a policy level, at a federal level, at a state level, at the, all the way down, that needs reinvention and needs fresh eyes to move it along. That's one, and a big one that can happen. And also mortgage, prices for, ordinary, consumers. There's other large policy shifts like merging Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Yeah.
If you merge Fannie and Freddie, you have billions of dollars of efficiency savings that can easily translate down, to the end mortgage user and bring down borrowing costs. And again, in theory, you look at those, but that's one whole set of discussions that if and when we go after that and update it, this is why the Constitution has amendments. This is why, these are meant to be nuanced and changed, needs to be addressed. That's going to have some massive, massive benefits to all of those that are impacted by it. Then you have the other side of it, is innovation in building in general. We're still building homes and building towers with very similar technology that we did in the 50s. And so there's clearly been 70 years, some would argue 700 years of innovation, growth during that time, where we need to look at, like, we're about to start 3D printing a bunch of houses on several of our properties. It's a great company doing great work. And we can already see how some of the 3D printing on essential housing and then the robotic mechanisms that are going in place to actually build the houses, the proficiency of them, not today, but on the next 2, 3, 4 years, we can cut building times down of single family homes from 7.5, 8 months to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then when you cut it down to 6 weeks, can some of those savings be passed down to the consumer? Can we, start to look at margins differently? But there's an innovation piece that's going to systematically happen, and I think ramp up on the building construction innovation side by itself, that has stalled some of the growth. And then there's some major policy changes as well that are in the pipeline. But I am very optimistic that both of those mechanical pieces are going to work themselves out. Will it cause a bunch of pain in the short term? Clearly, but it's creating such a pent up demand that at one point that pent up demand, I think, will break through, and that breakthrough will create breakthroughs and create innovative scale, and quite frankly, create a massive, massive whirlwind of prosperity.
Yeah. I really hope so, because it's just if you just go down to like kind of the bare bones, still now, if you want to go get a permit, generally in every jurisdiction, you're still going down to the municipal building and hoping that somebody's just going to approve your little thing on a piece of paper. It's like so ridiculously inefficient. That's just on a small scale, like one homeowner just trying to get a water heater permit. You take it up to your level where you have to go through all the entitlement and now everybody's fighting. You're, 0.001% closer to the wetlands, so you can't do this. It's just like it's not hard to see why the stoppages, but I love your perspective because I hope the same way, of course, for my kids, for all of our kids, like, hey, they're going to work this out and housing's going to become much better because it's just not right now. It's really not.
Well, I think the operative word is not right now.
Yeah.
And where we are as a country, where we are geopolitically, where we are in the economic cycles, back to this book that has become a recurring theme in my life recently, there are cycles and seasons. And right now, if you look at the campaigns between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and you read the campaign slogans and the grievances they had against each other, they look eerily similar.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, to the point where you probably wouldn't believe that it was Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and not two other fellas.
Right.
You might know. It's astonishing how similar they are. My point is, as a people, we aren't as interesting as we'd like to believe we are. We work in packs. Our generations have core values. The boomers have very different generational impact, value systems. The millennials do. We're raised by boomer parents, and then millennials come, and then so when you look at these norms and you start to see the patterns that happen, it becomes less burdensome, I think is the word for me, at least, because winter does end. The Cold War did end. The Berlin Wall did come down. These things that we looked at with such intensity that look so unique and so nuanced dissipate and evolve and change. The problems that you had 5 years ago with something, I'd venture to believe, without even knowing the nuances, you barely remember them.
Yeah.
And they were so important at the time, or the one dance recital for so-and-so, or this, or obviously clearly important, obviously things to focus on, but we also need to make sure we keep our perspective that we are in a very low season as a country. And that's based upon hundreds of years of history, even back to the Babylonians.
Yeah.
And there is a part where that resurgence comes. We're at the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution, which breaks a lot of things to create breakthroughs, and then coming out of a global pandemic and having interest rate issues and having all these other things in front of us. That can create so much overwhelm that it removes logic.
Yeah.
And when logic comes back into the equation and we can spot certain patterns and we can recognize certain patterns, we can know where we are, and knowing that spring will come again, which it will, and prosperity will flow again, which it will, we can make better decisions during that season of our own life, season of our own companies, season of our own country, our own economic cycles, and make the best decisions we can.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, man, I really appreciate it. Before we hop off, I just wanted to get a little bit more. First, is the best place for people to get in touch with your company at rastegarcapital.com?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's the best way.
Yeah. And who's your ideal avatar? I know we've talked high net worth, but when we're talking about, people are like, this guy sounds cool, I want to work with him. Still, there's a different avatar for everybody who comes on the show. Who's the avatar of the people who are working with you guys?
Well, we work with very large institutional investors as the bulk of our capital, and we have a substantial high net worth business as well. I think we've created a model that allows ordinary investors to co-invest alongside big institutions.
Yeah.
So to build, one of our towers in Dallas, a project we're very proud of at 1899 McKinney, probably needs $60 million of equity. Let's say, give or take about 150, 160 million of total capital, debt, and equity to build. So in that capital frame, there's rooms for family offices to put 10, 20 million.
Yeah.
There's rooms for large institutions to put in 90% of the equity. And we have a platform that if you're an accredited investor and you want to be involved in, what we believe to be very high quality real estate, there's an opportunity for you. And so I'm at the point in my career where mobilizing these, much larger scale developments that we've been land banking, we've been cultivating, we've been creating alpha through zoning, entitlements, architectural design, etc. It's time to take off on 6 or 7 of the biggest projects that we've put together, which require over $500 million of equity alone. So the great part is there's room for folks that want to be a part of these deals that are well informed at the 100,000, 200,000, range up to 60 million. And we have the risk controls. We have the platform to enable that. And that's something I'm very, very proud of.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think it does. Yeah, you think of it, you're like, oh, well, I just have 100 grand and it's 60 million, but you're investing along someone else, like, as you said, who's got, 20 million, or a family office who's
you're
bringing
riding
it
the
in.
coattails. In a perfect world, what I'd like to believe is the smaller investors, which is a lot of money for them, I'm sure, at the place they are, they can ride on the due diligence coattails of those other investors that may have deeper pockets, may have better analysts or something. So does that always work? I don't know, maybe not, but that's something I can be very proud of saying, if someone can invest at their pro rata share of this project, that normally the capital requirements are $10 million minimums, I'm very proud that we can offer accessibility to some projects like this that just at the beginning would be no, even if you could or not, or it's just a hard no. And so democratizing some of that work and making it more accessible is a big part of my mandate over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. All right, Ari, I really appreciate it. It's been great spending the time with you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah. All right. That's Ari Rastegar. He's the CEO of Rastegar Capital. Again, you can find them at rastegarcapital.com. I'm Jonathan Greene. We'll see you next episode. Thanks for sticking around to the end so you can get a preview of who's coming up on episode 295 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. And it's Chris Grenzig of JAG Property Management. We're talking single-family condos, townhomes, apartments, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and apartment buildings. And yes, it's in the title of his company. It's a property management show, but we talk about his background, his failures, and his successes next episode with Chris.